Hello everyone. We are now ready to start writing loops. This is an exciting time. We've spent a lot of time learning about Boolean conditions, if statements, and now assignment operators. We've seen motivation for why we would want to use iteration in our programs. Now it's time to do that iteration. So let's head over to the notes and start working on our warm-up task. We're going to work with while loops in this video and the next one, and then we'll expand to some of the other looping constructs in C++. Consequently, let's make a file called whileloopfun.cpp in gedit and code up an empty main function. Once you got your empty main function coded up, let's head over to the whiteboard or to your paper pencil to take some notes about while loops. Let's begin with the general template for a while loop. General template for a while loop actually starts out looking a lot like if statements, except with the word while instead of if. This actually looks just like an if statement, except we're using while instead of if. We've got while, open paren, close paren. In between the two parentheses, we've got a Boolean condition that we need to test. Then we've got curly braces, an open and a closed curly brace that group code together. Typically in the body of your loop, you'll have one or more executable statements. Now, here's where we're going to get slightly more specific than just swapping in while for if. These one or more executable statements are the statements that you want repeated. The body of this while loop represents a group of code that is repeated while this Boolean condition evaluates to true. So any code that you want repeated while this Boolean condition, and recall, I like to call Boolean conditions BCs. While this BC is true, that code should go in here. One special piece of code that you will likely want to have inside of the body of your while loop is progress towards the Boolean condition eventually becoming false. I'll write that up and then I'll explain it a little bit more. If this Boolean condition always evaluates to true, you have something called an infinite loop. The loop never ends. It continues repeating and repeating and repeating until either your program runs out of memory, or your program crashes, or your computer's shut down, or you manually go in and kill your program. Progress towards the Boolean condition being false ensures that your Boolean condition is eventually false, which means that this loop stops. In our last video, we saw shorthand assignment operators and pre and post increment and decrement operators because those are typically used for progress towards a while loop's Boolean condition being false. In fact, we're going to use one of those here shortly. So this is just a general template. It'll make a lot more sense when we see an example, and we'll trace through each step of the while loop with that example. It'll make a lot of sense then. But here's our template. If you look in the notes for today, I've also included a link for an image showing a flowchart for how a while loop executes. We know about flowcharts because we saw them when we were first learning about conditionals. We saw that a diamond represents a decision and a block represents an action, and we have these arrows that relate our decision and our actions. So here is our starting point for our flowchart, and we have a condition. If the condition evaluates to true, then we enter the body of our while loop and we execute the code in that block. Then we come back up to the condition and we test again. Is the condition true? If it is, we execute the code block again and come back up to the condition. We are stuck in this loop, testing the condition to be true, executing the code block, testing the condition to be true, executing the code block, until eventually this condition is tested and it evaluates to false. In that case, we exit the loop through this right arrow over here, and we continue with the next executable line of code after the while loop. So the only way to get out of a while loop, based on what we've learned so far, is this Boolean condition evaluating to false. That's why you always want that progress towards the Boolean condition being false in the body of your loop. Without it, you are stuck in this loop, condition, code block, indefinitely. Now, a lot of what I just said describing this flowchart is written up here in the notes. So I encourage you to take some time and come back and reread the notes, specifically this section, in order to understand the details of how while loops execute. We are going to go through the details of how they execute, but with an example, whereas this description here includes more general rules instead of the specific ones applying for our example we're going to work through now. All right, so let's say we want to write a program that's going to print a certain number of stars. It's a very simple program, but we're going to write it and use it as our example of a while loop. So let's say we have a variable called numStars, and numStars is initialized to 10. Our goal when numStars is 10 is to get output that would look like this. Ten stars all on one line, and then a new line character at the end. We want to write a loop to do this. Now, you're thinking, well, we could just see out a string that has 10 stars and then end it with an endl, and we get the same output. That's correct. But that wouldn't work if, say, numStars got changed to 5. In that case, we would want this output. 5 stars all on one line. Now you might be thinking, well, we could just have a string that has 5 stars in it and a separate string that has 10 stars in it and just print those out. But what if instead of this value being hard-coded, it came from the user? We prompted the user, hey user, enter in the number of stars you want printed. And that could be any number between, say, 0 and 10,000. This approach of just hard coding these strings would not work. We'd want to use a loop to do this. So our loop is going to print 1 star each iteration of the loop. So that means the body of our while loop is going to print a single star because that body is what's repeated each time our loop iterates. All right. We're going to have another variable called I, and I is going to be our loop control variable. We've seen something similar to a loop control variable when we learned about switch statements, right? We had our switch control variable. It was of integer type, and we used it in order to figure out which case is going to be evaluated or executed. So similarly, we have a control variable, and it's going to be used to figure out how long to repeat our loop, or how many iterations we're going to execute our while loop. So we'll start I at 0, and we want to continue looping while I is less than num stars. Each iteration of this loop, we're going to print a single star. Note that we don't want a new line on the end here because we want all of our stars on the same line. We'll print our new line outside of the loop. Recall that we only put code in the body of our loop that we want repeated. We repeatedly want to print stars, but we don't repeatedly want to print a new line. There's only one new line regardless of what num stars is. So that's why I put the new line outside of the body of the while loop. Now, there's a really key part of our while loop that we're missing, and it's our progress towards our Boolean condition being false. Currently, this loop is infinite. I is initialized to 0, 0 less than num stars, 0 is less than 5, completely indefinitely. I never changes, so I will always be less than num stars. So this would produce a program that would infinitely print out stars, which is not what we want for this example. So what we need to do is add our progress towards our Boolean condition being false. Each time we print a star, we want to add 1 to I, such that each iteration we get one step closer to this Boolean condition evaluating to false. So we could have I gets I plus 1, but we learned some shorthand assignment operators and pre and post increment operators that we could use instead. So we could do I is assigned I plus 1. We could do I plus assigned 1. We could do I plus plus. And we could even do plus plus I. Note that using the pre or post increment operator here doesn't matter because it's not part of a larger expression. So any of those 4 lines of code would work for our progress towards our Boolean condition being false. So now what I'm going to do is label each part of this code, and then we're going to trace through it and see how the code executes. Because previously all of our code has executed from top to bottom. But now we're going to have some code that's going to jump back up, and it's going to be a little strange at first. So let's walk through it. So let's label our initialization code as 1, our Boolean condition test as 2, printing out a star as 2a, our progress towards our Boolean condition being false as 2b, and our first executable statement outside of the body of the while loop as 3. Now let's draw some arrows. After 1 executes, 2 always comes next. What happens after 2 executes, though, depends on what this Boolean condition evaluates to. So if this is true, then 2a executes. If this is false, then 3 executes. When our Boolean condition evaluates to true, we enter the body of our loop, and we print out a star at 2a, and then we execute 2b, which is progress towards our Boolean condition being false. 2b also represents the last line of code in the body of our while loop. So after 2b, we come back up to 2, and we test, is our Boolean condition true or false? Do we keep repeating, or does this loop terminate? So now let's go through the entirety of this code. I'm going to draw a table. I'll put it right here. This table looks kind of similar to the table we made when we were tracing through I, J, and K for our pre and post increment and decrement operators. And these sorts of tables are really useful beyond that application, including tracing through code using loops, as you'll see here. All right, so we're at 1, and we're executing some code that's going to declare and initialize variables. Num stars is 5, and I is 0. Now we're down at line number 2, and we test. Is I less than num stars? Is 0 less than num stars? Yes, it is. So we enter in the body of our loop. We're at 2a. We print out a star. Then we come down to 2b, and we add 1 to I. I is now 1. Now we come back up and we test. Is I less than num stars? Is 1 less than 5? It is. We enter the body of our loop. We print out a star. We come down to 2b. We add 1 to I. I is now 2. We come back up and we test. Is I less than num stars? Is 2 less than 5? Yes, it is. We enter the body of our loop, 2a. We print out a star. We come down to 2b. We add 1 to I. I is now 3. We come back up. We test. Is I less than num stars? Is 3 less than 5? It is. We come in to the body, 2a. We print out a star. 2b. We add 1 to I. We come back up. We test. Is I less than num stars? Is 4 less than 5? It is. We enter the body of our loop. 2a. We print out a star. 2b. We add 1 to I. We come back up and we test. Is I less than num stars? Is 5 less than 5? No, it is not. So we do not enter the body of the loop. We instead follow the false path, and we come down to line number 3, and we print out a new line character. And you can see we do have our goal output displaying. I highly encourage you now to pause the video and change this to a different value, maybe like 7. Make a new table and see if you can trace through all of the different sequences of code and how they're executed. You can even list out the numbers, the green numbers, in order from this video that we just did with this example of 5, and try and reproduce it, perhaps with 5 or with that different value of 7. When you come back to the video, we're going to code this up in our whileloopfun.cpp. All right, we are in whileloopfun.cpp. Let's go ahead and code this up. Once you've got your while loop coded up, go ahead and run it and make sure that you do get those 5 stars all on the same line. And then try changing it and see if your code changes as you'd expect it would. So far, this looks good. Now, what I'd like to do is show you 2 things. One is alternative ways to solve this while loop. The second one is what happens if you have an infinite loop. So let's first solve this a slightly different way. So I've made a copy of it, and what I'm going to do is initialize I to num stars instead of to 0. And then instead of adding 1 each iteration of the loop, I'm going to subtract 1, and I'm going to continue while I is greater than 0. Awesome. Now, one more thing I'll show you. What happens if there's no progress towards the Boolean condition being false? We get an infinite loop. You can kill this infinite loop by pressing Control-C on your keyboard. That's how you kill your program. In the next video, we're going to work a lot more while loop examples, so definitely stay tuned until then.